Mike and I often have a dispute over whether a radio tower can be a work of art. Now, I reject the idea. I simply reject that you can turn anything that exists, such as the telephone through which my on-air calls come, as a work of art. It is not a work of art. It is a practical device that may have beautiful things about it. It may reflect the genius of man. It may reflect God's glory in giving man the means to improve telephony since the time of the telegraph. The red light is certainly beautiful, and the array of numbers is gorgeous. And there's a silver face where the numbers are in their round circles. And there are other things to note. There's a little antenna off the right-hand side of this phone that can be moved up and it can be moved down. Now, this is all powerful and it's all beautiful, but it is not a work of art. And I don't care how poetically you might want to say that, nor a radio tower. I'm holding here in my formerly newsprint ink stained fingertips, two miscellaneous items. One is a cartridge, a bullet, that we for some reason have here in the studio, not in the studio. It's from an SKS rifle. And then the second thing I just happened to grab nearby is a yellow marker. I use yellow markers because highlighters, because they're helpful to me in my business, which is effectively talking to you, my listener, and having my eye dart down to certain keywords or to certain quotes or things that are not to be forgotten in our get together here. And by the way, if you want that light to ring up on that phone, make it really beautiful phone, right? Make it beautifully artistic phone by making the light go on and the sound rumble, and you can get on the air. And the way to connect with that work of art is 800-8949, 800-8949. Now, I wanted just to think for a second about the work of the artist in a postmodern world, which has a theory which is untenable in many areas. Postmodernism is untenable and unworkable in the end. It's not untenable if you want certain results. If you want to have a tyranny, well, then postmodernism and modernism are alike going to get you there, right? They will allow it. They will permit a tyranny where one man is over another, and where one man is over another unlawfully and abusively, then that is an injustice. But if you have a postmodern ethic, then how would you say it's unjust? How would you say that it's unjust for people who are falsely accused to be locked in jail or in prison for decades? How can that be unjust? If it happened, it happened, right? And existence is morality. In other words, there is no moral standard which judges existence, which judges consequences of men's actions. There is no external theory that judges a work of art. No, it's all subjective. And what you have in the postmodern ethic is power. That, in the end, is the only deciding factor. If you have power and you've succeeded in oppressing people for your own gain and for the gain of your side, there's no way by which you can be condemned. There's no system. There's no ruler to lay against you to show whether you're 5 inches long or 5 feet long. Right? There is not a standard by which to put you in your proper place in relation to other things. There just isn't a standard. Postmodernism in art, it just as postmodernism in law and in culture, are deleterious to liberty, deleterious to freedom. Deleterious simply means bad for, right? Deleterious is harmful of those things. And of course, they are harmful of prosperity. And here on the David Tula Show at 800-8949, 800-8949, we talk a great deal about prosperity. How do we become prosperous, and how do we have the means of affording life for tomorrow and avoiding being debtors, right? Avoiding being indebted or enslaved to others. Our whole economy is geared towards servitude and slavery, sad to say, partly because we have a medium of exchange, the dollar, which is ungodly, A, and B, it's unconstitutional. And so therefore the people who can create these dollars, so-called, are the ones who finally control the destiny of the country, in addition to the destiny of markets and prosperity of a few. The prosperity going to that few and denied to everybody else. And so there has to be, in my estimation, based as a person who reads the Bible, right? There has to be, in my understanding, I should say, an external standard, and that would be for beauty as well. Robert Schofield, the painter, admits that the face of one woman is a miracle to behold, and one cannot stop looking at her, for she is so beautiful. And that the woman, she's on the right, and there on the left, there in the cafeteria line, is another woman, same age, is just as plain as could be, and not worth even thinking about. Not that she couldn't be lovable and not be great, a great wife, a great lover, a great sister, a great daughter, but she's not beautiful. Okay, there's not the look of beauty about her. She's just plain. She's just regular, right? And yet the beauty on the other side catches everybody's gaze, and one's gaze cannot be turned from it, because she is beautiful, and all her parts combine by an external standard. So there is implied in man's dealings with looking at female faces, there's implied that there has to be, and that there is, a standard of judgment, a judgment that is outside of any one particular man. And yet the postmodern argument in art is that, well, there is no standard by which to judge my skill. There's no standard by which to say that I can or can't draw a hand well, right, or a face well, or that I can't accurately reproduce someone's mugshot in a portrait or a bust. No one's to say that my version of this person's nose and features and hair and neck are inaccurate. Who's to say? Who's to say that that's clearly that person, or who's to say that it's not? And so I'm skeptical of the postmodern rhetoric and the whole idea that art is about your inner landscape, that the artist is simply projecting himself onto his canvas or into his stone or onto his clay, and that it's an inner working. It is a subjective experience. If the purpose of art is simply subjective and not religious and informative, which it is, then skill doesn't matter, and we all carry away from a work of art our own meaning. Well, let me just ask you, what artist is satisfied with that? Certainly, there are thousands of artists who are following the modern reigning concept, and much of what they do, though, is offensive. Much of what they do is putting down the viewer. They're making small of the viewer, making small of him being a chump, being one of the masses, being ignorant, being part of the hoi polloi part of the mass, right? And so many artists are simply condescending. They may have a bit of feces in a tray, or some stupid collection of object, and a toilet bowl with a single dead rose on the tank, right? And say, this is my presentation, this is the world at large, and I'm presenting this as my great work. Well, that's conceptual, and that may be making a point, and you may earn a big commission from an important New York patron to have that toilet brought to the museum with the proper fencing to keep off the visitors, right? And earn your $500,000 commission on that piece. But is it art? Is it beauty? And is there such thing as beauty? And so I really like talking with artists about this question, because I believe that there is an external standard. I believe that it is a standard apart from any one artist, and that artist is under the subject, under the judgment of that standard. So if it is simply splotches on canvas, or if it's an attempt to create a still life in some fashion, or a landscape with the sun falling across the face of the cliffs and filling the bay with light, that is something that is attempting to approximate reality, and that is something the viewer then can say, I'm there, and I'm living in this moment through this painting in this other world, and it's a world I can understand. It's a world I can be part of. It's not just conceptual. It is an actual place, or this is an actual person I'm looking at in this painting, and I'm empathic with that person. I have empathy. I have identity with that person. in the painting. I see that person's soul, and that the distress I can imagine as part of that person's life. I can feel, I can see it, and all the details of the painting confirm my understanding of this human being, this person made in God's image. I can understand that person, and I can empathize with that person. And so the operation there is according to this external standard that I'm suggesting to you, my listener, exists. 800-8949, 800-8949. And so the question I want to ask about is there a standard in law? Is there a standard in society? Is there a way we can hold runaway government to account? Or if we're postmodernists, do we just simply accept, well, you don't worry too much about that. It is what it is. And we may have a police state. We may have injustice. We may have people in Hamilton County jailed for debt they can't pay. We have people in the county, and you've got to help me find who these people are. You, my listener, there are people in the Hamilton County Jail who can't pay a $200 court debt. And I don't have the names here, and I don't have the details, but I'm willing to bet that there are some, for lack of $300, have been in the jail for months, and haven't even had a trial. And how is that right? If you're a postmodernist, you say, well, every man has his own reality. So the jailer has his reality, and the victim has his reality, and I have mine looking at that imagined situation, and I may have some facts about other cases, and I may have that as my reality, and we're all in our own little realities. But if the world is really, as the postmodernist suggests, if that world is really there, then how can anything be accomplished? How can anything be built? How can a city be built? How can a neighborhood be developed? How can the people in East Ridge be secure in their property and papers? The postmodernists would say, well, things may happen that are bad, but we just really can't worry too much about that because, everyone has his own reality. Well, no, we don't all have our own realities. We don't. Okay. We're made in God's image. We're like him. And so we have an interest that is like his. And, the scripture says that his law is written into our consciences. And we're made in his image, and therefore it's written into us that right is right and wrong is wrong. And we know what's wrong. We know when there is what the Bible would call a sin, right? Some sins are unmistakable. They're simply unmistakable. And my concern here as your host here on Nougat Radio is that the sins that are the biggest in our area are not private sins, right? They're not sins of private parties. They are sins of the public party, the government. The judiciary, for example. And I would one thing that just comes to mind as I think about this is how come people who are Christians who went to church yesterday don't care about important questions that are, say, in the law. For example, in Title 39 of the Tennessee Code Annotated, there's a rule that says every criminal charge and every element of a charge has to have mens rea, meaning the guilty mind. The officer, the judge, the prosecutor, and the defense attorney all have to be cognizant. They have to know that intent to violate the law has to be part of the charge. And when is that ever brought up? It's never brought up. And so what we have in our legal system in criminal cases is the absolute rejection of the law of the state and the law of God that says intent has to be part of the charge. In other words, you can't have a criminal charge that says someone failed to show up for court unless you're going to prove and argue that person intended to not show up. So in other words, it's not neglect that can bring that charge. It's not, well, I had to go to work today or I told I was going to be fired. Therefore, I couldn't make my court date. Okay, that's not intent. A man who can't make his court date because he's going to get fired for one more absence is not intending to violate the law. And yet, Jim Hammond and his deputies will, and David Roddy and his cops will charge someone with failure to appear without having done even the rudimentary investigation on intent. The intent has to be argued in every element of the charge. And so because this law is rejected, the statutory law is rejected, and because God's law is rejected, in so doing, we have injustice. And the postmodern ethic simply can't see any of this as important. It's as bad as much in Christianity is bad. I'm afraid to say that Christianity is in a very weak state in Hamilton County because Christian people don't see this as a problem. they think, well, that's over there, and I'm over here having my worship service and singing my songs, and making prayers and having small groups. I'm busy. Okay, I really can't think about people in jail today. I just really can't. And so this is a problem in our agreeing, people in the church and people not in the church, agreeing with the postmodern ethic that says that we all have our own reality and we all project our own reality. And there is no way of connecting anything. Humanism, the modernism and humanism, which is the fading paradigm in our culture, it did have some advantages in that it believed in a collective, in a unified whole, right? Postmodernism is a reaction against that. But humanism, for all of its progressivism and statism, it did believe that there is a single reality. And of course, Christianity makes that case too. There is a universe. There is one existence, and God made it, right? God is provident over the universe and ordains all things to come. Nothing happens outside of his providential rule and his will, his potent will in all affairs. And so humanism sort of shares that with Christianity, and Christianity can explain how it works. But postmodernism, where every artist does his own thing and there is no standard for beauty, that is questionable. And I would say it's questionable philosophically, it's questionable religiously, and it may be questionable visually. Robert Schoolfield, who's a fine young artist in that school, thinks that, well, when he's gone, his work will be forgotten. Well, maybe. But I would say that your work is more likely to endure if it has a claim upon an external standard. In other words, if it appeals to what is right and just and true and beautiful, and that standard being always there, always true, and always right. A woman who's beautiful is always beautiful in whatever age she is born, right? If a picture of her is seen 1,000 years later, men and women in that time will look at that picture and say, that woman 1,000 years back was a beauty. She was remarkably beautiful. And that painting of her is remarkably beautiful and makes us sort of revere her and revere the way she's made, the way that she's put together. And there is an external standard. In law, there is an external standard. And there is going to be an appeal tomorrow. Now, don't have the details, but an appeal to an external standard of right and wrong among people in East Ridge, Tennessee, where there is a redevelopment plan from the East Ridge Housing and Redevelopment Authority that staff attorney from the Institute for Justice, Milad Imam, says is extra constitutional. And that is the loose way in which the Kelo decision back about, well, maybe 12, 15 years ago, the Kelo decision ruled. The one that says that there is no real standard for public use, right? You can have land taken for a private corporate profit use, not just for a public use. So let's say, just briefly here, Tombras Avenue, where City Hall is there's going to be a plan put into effect for a new building, right? Another municipal building, which of course would be, I would say, wrong on other grounds. But let's just say it's something that's been planned, and it's intended to go up right next to City Hall. That means leveling 4 houses across the street. Those are private houses, but that building, which is a civic center and a bureaucracy center, has a public purpose ostensibly, right? So those 4 houses legally can be condemned, and then if there's a trial over the condemnation, it would be for the amount, right? Once there's a condemnation under the just takings statute and the just takings provision in the Constitution, the trial in which the people are involved in the petit jury, that trial simply determines the dollar amount, right? That's what the trial is for. But 4 houses are gone. That's a public use because that is a public building serving the public at large. And those houses are going to have to give way. The owners are going to have to take a settlement or go to court and have a settlement assigned by the jury. That's a public use. But having those houses leveled because a shopping center is going to go in from which the city can gain taxes, that's another matter. And that is a postmodern argument. That is, if you're a postmodernist, you'll say, well, income to East Ridge coffers, that is a public service, right? There is, if we can level these houses and put in a shopping center, with a chain store in their in our overbuilt retail market. That will bring tax revenues. That's a public use because the public in the corporation of East Ridge gets the benefit of the tax revenues. See, that's that's stretching out the use argument, as Milad Imam says. Now, he's going to have an event tomorrow, and I promise you that there'll be details at Nooga Radio. That's Nooga Radio on our Facebook page. That's the Nooga Radio page on Facebook. We'll have details about that. It's tomorrow, and members of that organization in Arlington, Virginia, will be on scene, including Bob McNamara, who is, I think, the leading attorney. So that is very exciting to think that there's legal help coming here. It's pro bono, and that is to say, paid for by donors of Institute for Justice. That's Institute for Justice, IJ.org, IJ.org. And we want East Ridge to be a safe place to live. We want Chattanooga to be a safe place to live, and so we want there to be not a postmodern perspective on the law that controls. There should be, I would say, a godly perspective on the law that controls. There is an external standard. There is rightness. There is justice. Justice does exist. It is objective and it is particular, and it's not something that has to wait on subjective feeling. Now, any action by a governing body that is based on private feeling is called arbitrary and capricious. That is a standard in law. That the phrase arbitrary and capricious appears many, many times in the cases of our courts, and it is the one to watch out for. And I think in many ways, the East Ridge Housing and Redevelopment Authority proposal for redevelopment has that in it. Just as the City Council of East Ridge passed last Tuesday the Airbnb ordinance, it is also arbitrary and capricious, as I pointed out. Not that people seem to care, right? People don't care about that rule, but it is the basis upon which things are overturned. But why pass a rule that's clearly unconstitutional on its face? Prima facie evidence of it being unconstitutional. Why would a conservative candidate for the state house, Esther Helton, vote for it? Why would she vote for that? Doesn't the Constitution say something to her? Well, maybe it doesn't. You see, maybe it doesn't, and maybe it doesn't say things to other people as well in East Ridge and in Chattanooga. Chattanooga passed a like ordinance. I'm not a postmodernist. I understand that artists emote on canvas. I understand that, and many good things come from that. Robert Schoolfield would be an example of one who has work certainly worth looking at, and I would say support our local artist Robert Schoolfield and others. But the argument behind it, I think, should be looked at suspiciously, right? And watched when it's used, especially by government officials. We don't want to have a postmodern government. We want to have a constitutional government. Oh, yes. That's how boring that is. Just boring, dull as dishwater to have a constitutional government. The government just sits there. Well, maybe that is a better thing than having an activist, intervening, helpful government that wants to bring prosperity to your town. Maybe a government that really wants to do that is not your friend in the end, after all. And maybe your jewelry and your furniture and your front porch is not secure after all. This is David Toulis. I've got some important announcements. 3, 2, 1.